once we get started, but I want to thank you all for being here for our webinar on OSHA's Top 10 Citations and Standards Update. And I'll introduce myself. My name is Marley Dysart. I'm a risk management consultant at Anthem Risk. Anthem Risk provides a variety of risk management services. These include group programs for workers' compensation, professional and general liability, and medical stop-loss. We also provide customized risk management consulting. And on behalf of Anthem Risk, we would like to welcome you to our webinar on OSHA's Top 10 Citations and a Standards Update. Before we get started, I want you to know that everyone's lines are muted to avoid interruptions in the webinar. And we'll also have a short Q&A at the end. So with that, I will go ahead and get started for time's sake. And we will cover, like I said, today's OSHA Top 10 Most Frequently Cited Violations for the fiscal year of 2024. And then at the end, we will have a standards update. So we're looking at these citations that occurred from October 1st of 2023 through September 30th of 2024 and what made the top 10. To recap, give you a little background on OSHA standards. They are rules that describe the methods employers must use to protect employees from hazards. They are designed to protect workers from a wide range of hazards. And where a serious hazard exists, but there's no specific standard, employers must comply with the general duty clause. And with this, it's basically saying that the place of employment should be free from recognized hazards that are likely to cause or may cause death or serious physical harm to employees. So with OSHA standards, there are 4 different groups. There's general industry, which most of what we do in our industry, in healthcare specifically, would fall under. This is the largest group and encompasses the largest amount of workers and work sites. Outside of general industry, they also have specific standards for construction, maritime, and agriculture. And the standards an employee is covered by are based upon what they're doing at the moment and not what they're doing as a whole as an employer. So an example of that would be healthcare industries would fall under general industry standards for the bulk of our activities. But if we have operations that involve building construction, which I know many of you do have, and that happens very often, or alterations and repairs, that work may fall under the construction standards. So for the top 10 most frequently cited violations, we're going to cover that today. And this is a really good place to start when you're looking at your safety and health programs. If you want to do a quick check-in on the health of your safety program, or if you want to start creating stronger programs in the first place, these top 10 are going to give you a really good place to start to look at, and you're going to know that this is what an investigator will look for, some of the easy low-hanging fruit that they're going to look for if they are coming on site for an inspection. And these top 10 are always typically the same each year. They may change positions, but a lot of what we're seeing is the same thing that OSHA's citing as frequently cited violations year after year. So these are really good violations and standards to be familiar with and make sure your facilities are in check with, and that way you can make sure you're keeping your employees safe and avoiding these citations. So here is our list of our top 10 most frequently cited violations, and the list, the order that they were cited. You can see that out of these top 10, all of them either fall under the general industry standard, which is 1910, or construction industry, which is 1926. So those 2 are the most frequently out of the types of OSHA standards. Those are the most frequently cited. They fall under those 2 categories. We'll start with fall protection, and there are 4 citations in the top 10 that are all related to fall protection. So that has been the case for many years now. So these are some that are really important for us to pay attention to and to know really well. For the 14th year in a row, fall protection retains its #1 spot. And so we'll look at that one first. But then after that, we have ladders, which is at #3. That's actually up from 1 spot last year. Scaffolding is at #4, also up a spot from last year. And fall protection training is in the 7th position. And so fall protection is the standard we're looking at here. And the rule here is you need to have some type of fall protection if work is occurring that is above 4 feet in general industry or above 6 feet in construction. I think it's good for all of us to get that 4-foot number in our mind because most of what we're doing will fall under general industry. And so if you have work that is occurring above 4 feet for any time, for any reason, you need to make sure fall protection is in place for workers in that area. Some common types of work that may happen in your facilities where you need to make sure you have fall protection in place include replacing HVAC units, converting parking lot lighting, renovating spaces, and there could be a whole list of other things. So if you see someone working above that level, you want to make sure they have the appropriate fall protection and want to keep 4 feet in your mind there. So this worker here is a great example of lack of fall protection, and some things that would help him would include compliant guardrails. What we're seeing here, that's not compliant. So guardrails do have specific rules that they need to follow to be compliant, and they're not really doing you any good if you're working outside the guardrail like he is. So guardrails would definitely benefit him here for fall protection, but then also a personal fall arrest system would be great to see here. So when it comes to fall protection, focus on unprotected sides and edges over 4 feet for general industry and knowing that that needs fall protection. Each employee on a walking working surface with unprotected sides and edges should be protected from falling by the use of different things. You could have guardrails, you could have safety net system, you could have personal fall arrest systems, whatever is appropriate to keep them safe. The next one under fall protection that was cited in the top 10 is ladders in construction specifically. So this standard specifies protocols to ensure safety, including guidelines for various types of ladders. Ladders must not be loaded beyond their design weight capacity. You want to make sure that the steps and rungs should be free of hazards that could cause slips. I think we've got another picture there for you. Yep. So these are definitely pictures of inappropriate ladder use. And if you see anything like this in your facilities, stop that work immediately. I hope it's something you never see, but ladders are a common one to find hazards and violations with. Common issues that you may pick up on when you're looking at ladders in your facilities are the stickers on the ladders. They may either be missing completely where you can't where there's no sticker at all, or they could be damaged to the point where you can't read the load capacity and important information that you need for that ladder. Also, before anyone uses a ladder, they're required to inspect it, make sure it is safe for use. So if you see somebody using a ladder and it also doesn't have those stickers with that information on it, or it's damaged, that's telling you they didn't inspect it. So that could actually set you up for 2 citations. You need to make sure that the rungs and steps of the ladder are safe and in good working condition. And when you see workers using ladders, they need to make sure that they face the ladder when ascending or descending and maintain at least one hand on the ladder at all times. So there needs to be 3 points of contact when ascending or descending a ladder. But I know this, if you're out there, just walking through your facilities. If you pass by a ladder, take a moment, stop, look at it, and make sure it's in good working condition, because this is probably, from my experience, this is one that is very common to see. And if you find something that's not in the appropriate condition, alert the people who are using it that this is not appropriate and we need to get it fixed and taken care of before somebody gets hurt. Okay, next is scaffolding in construction. So when looking at scaffolding, the scaffolding standard mandates that every scaffold and its components must bear its own weight and at least 4 times the maximum intended load. The platform should be a minimum of 18 inches wide and equipped with a guardrail or personal fall arrest system. Crossbars in an X, like you see here in this picture, do not count as guardrails. The standard has specific requirements for the guardrail height and position. So if you see something like this, again, you want to make sure you get that taken care of and addressed immediately. And this was actually a hospital that was being built, and this construction company did not have any of that right. So that's a typical one to look for, is making sure that the guardrails are appropriate, but scaffolding is also in safe working condition. This should also be inspected prior to use. So if you see scaffolding that is damaged and somebody's using it, that also tells you they probably didn't inspect it. Last, under fall protection, we have fall protection training, which this guy clearly did not attend. You can see how he's putting his harness on incorrectly. So the employer shall provide a training program for each employee who might be exposed to fall hazards. The program should enable each employee to recognize the hazards of falling and train each employee in the procedures to be followed to minimize the hazards. So this should include knowing where fall protection is, how to put it on, how to inspect it, what to look for as far as making sure it is in good working condition. All of that is important, and it's good to get their hands on that equipment at least annually to run through and get familiar with. So when they need to use it, they are using it correctly. I know when I went through OSHA 30 training, and I'm sure others in this group, if you've gone through it with Anthem, then you probably used apps like Harness Hero. I found that really helpful for practice, and I think if you are doing training in your facilities, then that could be something you would want to implement as a good tool for employees to use to practice getting familiar with what the different pieces of fall protection are, how to use it, how to inspect it, all of that. I found that specific app very helpful in kind of making it fun and easy to get the training done without having to pull out all the equipment every single time. So that was actually called Harness Hero. That's something you're interested in. It's free to download and use. All right, so moving away from fall protection, we'll focus on the number 2 specific hazard that was listed as the top. This was number 2, showing up as a violation out of the top 10. So hazard communication, specifically for general industry, was number 2. And this was a violation that was came up in roughly 10% of all OSHA inspections during this time frame. And so the hazard communication standard provides guidelines on hazard communication, specifically establishing a HAZCOM program, proper labeling, proper training, safety data sheets, and what that needs to look like as far as knowing how to access them and having them for all of your chemicals. And then your hazard communication plan should include a written plan, a chemical inventory list, labels and warnings, and training for your employees on the chemicals that they're working with and how to access a safety data sheet for those chemicals. Every chemical in your facilities should have a safety data sheet that matches that chemical and that staff know how to quickly access and read and follow. You should have a process in place where everyone knows that. And it's good to evaluate your program. One way to do that is through random checks. So it's a pretty simple thing. You could pick a different type of chemical, pick a chemical that you know employees are working with. You could get a picture of it or just, bring an example to them and ask them if they know how to access the safety data sheet for that chemical. Make sure that chemical and the safety data sheet are included on your inventory list for your facility. And then you want to make sure that employee has been trained on how to safely use that chemical. And so in healthcare, we think about areas like maybe EVS and engineering as common places for chemical use, but the kitchen is another one that you don't want to forget about. The lab definitely has its fair share of hazardous chemicals, and the OR is another big one. But don't forget about your patient-facing staff and the medications that they're dealing with. Those can also be considered hazardous chemicals, especially chemo is a big one. So if you have specific units that are working with chemo, make sure that they have been trained and know how to safely use that hazardous chemical or the hazards associated with that type of medicine, and are you doing that safely? So patient-facing staff sometimes get forgotten a little bit, but you want to make sure they are definitely in the loop and familiar with this process. We're going to look at some headlines related to hazard communication and chemical releases that have happened in hospitals, just so you know this can happen. It's very easy for a chemical release to happen in healthcare, and when it does, it doesn't take much for it to be impactful in a negative way. So this headline just shows that this hospital had to be evacuated in the histology wing after a xylene spill, which was considered negligible. I don't know how negligible it could be if people are needing to evacuate and be treated. So I don't consider many spills negligible. But with this spill, they had to evacuate that histology wing of the hospital, and 3 employees needed treatment for their exposure to that chemical. And again, it doesn't take much. You just want to make sure that the staff in the areas that are working with it, with the chemical, know what to do if they have a spill. So I think it's important to make sure that they know who to call, who's had HAZWOPER training in the facility, who has the right PPE and equipment to clean up a spill, and who to call if that happens. One tip I could share would be to post some, like a tip sheet for your HAZCOM and hazard HAZWOPER team in your areas, like the lab and like the OR, where if a spill happens, they know like quickly what steps to take to make sure that they are safe. And a good thing for them to do would be to get out of that area and call people who know how to take care of it if they are not trained. A couple other headlines that we want to share include this one in an Oklahoma City hospital that was partially evacuated due to a chemical spill. And this involved a 1/4 gallon spill of an acid-based cleaner used for disinfection. Something that all of us have in our facilities, very common, is cleaners, and especially in healthcare, we've got to keep the place clean. So it doesn't take much, 1/4 of a gallon spilled, and they needed to partially evacuate. 7 employees were evaluated and released due to this. And the last one, this newspaper headline is not something you would ever want to see your hospital in the paper for, but it's not a good look. It said chemical leak at a New Hampshire hospital nearly causes 20 patients and staff to lose consciousness. This is a place of healing. Yikes. So this happened in an inpatient OR. There was a suspected case of unintentional anesthesia gas that was leaked, and they had to evacuate the ED. The OR was closed for a week while they were investigating. So you know how impactful that is on your facilities and your community if you have to close an ED or close an OR for any period of time. That's a big deal. 19 employees were ill because of this. 12 were transferred to another hospital, and some had to be held overnight for observation. So very serious, and all of this can be avoided. So having that strong HAZCOM program can do a lot to help here. Okay, next we're going to look at respiratory protection, and this was number 4 on our top 10 list. Most of the violations related to respiratory protection fell under automotive paint and body shops. When we're looking at respiratory protection, what's important is to select the appropriate respiratory protection for the task being performed, and you want to confirm fit testing for each type of respiratory protection being used. You want to follow CDC guidelines and consider multiple factors to ensure that there's safety from these hazards. So the standard dictates the process should include an exposure assessment to identify the type and level of hazardous exposure that workers might face, and consider things like the job site, that specific worker characteristics, and any other factors that could impact fit testing and respiratory protection. If you have been in healthcare through COVID, you know that there was grace given in 2020 for fit testing, but this was not an exemption. And as of 2021, we should all be up to date on our employee fit testing and have that done annually, or as changes happen that would require that to need to occur. At number 5, we have lockout tagout for general industry. So this had the second most willful violations on the list. And this one's very serious, as they all are, but this is one that is pretty scary. So lockout is mandated when an energy isolating device can be locked out, ensuring complete de-energization. And when this isn't possible, tagout may be employed if it assures full employee protection. Training for lockout tagout is mandatory, and retraining is mandatory when there's a change, when there's anything that would cause that to be needed. So with lockout tagout, you want to make sure they know how to do verification that lockout tagout is performed, and there needs to be a written program that includes machine-specific information for your facilities and the types of work that they're doing. This program needs to be reviewed annually, and they need to be trained on group lockout tagout also, if that is needed. Some examples of how this may be used in your facilities would include things like changing a light ballast in a patient room, elevator repair, HVAC repair, filter changes, boiler work, and many other things. So with this, verification that the equipment is de-energized is crucial. This is the biggest thing. Before work begins, they need to make sure that de-energizing has happened, that is shut down, and it is safe to work on that equipment. So that can save a life, just simply making sure that verification is done. This is training that is crucial. So electrical shock injuries do occur in healthcare. Some of you may have had them in your facilities. I know one I'm familiar with where an employee was injured significantly by an electrical shock in a hospital when changing a light ballast. And they had multiple third-degree burns. They were out of work for several weeks. We've just seen examples where this is very, very serious. So this is training that is vital. Next, at number 6, we have powered industrial trucks for general industry. So this applies to different powered industrial trucks like forklifts, tractors, platform lift trucks, pallet jacks are included here, or anything that is running on the electrical motor or an internal combustion engine. You're going to see this in areas such as your warehouse, your loading dock, kitchen and cafeteria, areas where we're moving heavy pallets and large pieces of equipment. For your facilities, you want to make sure you have site-specific training, and including in that training, you need to make sure they know how to check and verify that the seat belts are in safe working condition and are on the appropriate piece of equipment. So your forklifts and things like that. You also need to have parking brakes that work and they know how to use them. So lots can be included here, but this training should be done annually, and refreshers also as needed, or as you have new equipment come in. You want to make sure that your staff is trained and checked off on their training for how to use this equipment. Here's an example of someone who clearly needs some retraining. When we're using a forklift, we don't ride around with the master race. So things like that should definitely be addressed in training. Okay, at number 9, we have eye and face protection in construction. And this has stayed at number 9 for a couple years, but the number of violations for eye and face protection has increased. So the top industry cited for protections was roofing contractors. And keep in mind, this is specific to the construction industry. So that's what they're saying, the violations they're occurring a lot of the times with roofing contractors. And I think many of us have worked in facilities where you've had roofing contractors on site. So definitely something to keep an eye on if you're having that work done. But basically, you need to make sure that eye and face protection is provided and it's being used and is appropriate for the task that they are performing. So if they are exposed to a hazard such as flying particles, chemicals, anything that can cause harm if it comes in contact with their face and eyes, some kind of face and eye protection needs to be used. And this should be, like we said, provided by the employer. And we all know people aren't going to use equipment if it is not comfortable, if it is not easy to use, easy to clean, things like that. So consider that when you're implementing PPE of any kind. But here we're going to talk about the eye and face protection, making sure it's something people are actually going to use. We also need to make sure that employees wearing prescription lenses have protection that accommodates their prescriptions. It needs to either fit over their prescription glasses or accommodate with that so they can safely use the equipment, the PPE, and wear their prescription lenses at the same time because they need to see what they're doing. So if you have people, employees that are cutting metal studs during renovation, grinding, or doing any kind of welding work, those are some easy ones to look for to make sure they're wearing appropriate eye protection and face protection when doing that work. Here's some examples of inappropriate eye and face protection. Cardboard, it's not going to cut it. And plus, his eyes aren't even covered in any way. So here, we all know if we saw something like that, we'd probably have a heart attack, but that's definitely considered inappropriate eye and face protection, as is what this fellow's using. So here, I mean, he's not even wearing like gloves on his hands. So there's a whole lot to be concerned about here. I can't tell what the gentleman actually doing the welding work has on, but my guess is it's probably nothing that's much better. So make sure your workers are provided the appropriate types of protection to keep them safe when they're doing this work. All right, at number 10, we have machine guarding for general industry. So this is something for all of us. When it comes to machine guarding, OSHA defines machine guards as barriers which prevent access to dangerous areas. So think about anything where you have rotating parts, sparks, and blades. You want to make sure that is guarded from anyone being able to easily access that and be injured. So one thing to consider here is the 7-foot rule for machine guarding. And that requires that when the periphery of a blade of a fan or that piece of equipment is less than 7 feet above the floor or working area, the level or the blade must be guarded. And the guard must not have openings that are larger than 1/2 of an inch. So this one, I think if you're walking through, your facilities building or somewhere where you're having maybe trash compactors, conveyor systems, air compressors, things like that, look and make sure that your guarding is there and it's also in good condition, so it's not broken off and things like that. And if it looks unsafe, it's probably unsafe. This one, if it looks like you could get your hand caught in there, probably needs a guard. So just something to be on the lookout for, and know that, again, if it looks unsafe, if I can get to a rotating part or something that sparks easily, then we should probably put a guard there. Okay, that wraps up those top 10. So like we said, these top 10 do not change very much year to year. These are typically what OSHA cites as the top 10 year after year as far as their frequently cited violations. So if you have someone coming on site from OSHA, this is that low-hanging fruit that they're going to look for. We know that fall protection was a big one. 4 out of these 10 were related to fall protection. So that's something to keep in mind, look for in your facilities, be very familiar with these standards. And not only just because we don't want a violation, because of course we don't want that, but more importantly, we want to make sure we're keeping employees safe. We want everyone to go home the way they came. So these are dangerous areas that they're working in, and we want to make sure we know these standards and not only just meet them, but if we can, go above and beyond to keep workers safe. So next, we're going to cover a quick standards update from OSHA. You can see listed here the different standards that are in different processes. As far as the ruling, we've got a pre-rule stage, proposed rule stage, and final rule stage for OSHA. And we'll just briefly cover on the next few slides where each where some of them, specifically the ones that apply to many of us, are, and what updates you may be seeing in the future, or where they currently are, and what we expect. So first, we have in the pre-rule stage the blood lead level for medical removal standard. And here, OSHA is considering rulemaking to revise its standards for occupational exposure to lead. Medical findings indicate the blood lead level needs to be lowered due to adverse health effects occurring at the current thresholds. So this one's in an early stage. As I'm sure many of us know, these changes take time to implement, but this is one you may see in the future as far as these threshold levels being lowered to make sure we're keeping these exposure levels for employees at a safe level. So that one's in the pre-rule stage. In the proposed rule stage, at the notice of proposed rulemaking, one of them is the infectious disease standard, and that would be a new standard. OSHA is considering the need for a standard to ensure that employers establish a comprehensive infectious control program and control measures to protect employees from exposure to infectious agents that can cause significant disease. So this one is in that proposed rule stage, but one to be on the lookout for. We also have a lockout tagout update, which would update to expand to use computer-based control use and just kind of catching up with the times and innovation as it happens with lockout tagout. Prevention of workplace violence in healthcare is also a new standard that they're looking at implementing. I'm sure many of you have heard rumblings about that for a while, but we will definitely be keeping a close eye on the progress with that standard. Another one would be the Red on Fit testing protocol. That would be a new protocol, and that would be approving an additional quantitative fit testing protocol for controlled negative pressure fit testing for its inclusion in the respiratory protection standard. And then a couple more there that are in the proposed rule stage, as well as these on this slide. We have our heat illness prevention standard, which I'm sure you've all heard a lot about. I know this summer, a lot of information came out about this standard. We sent some out to the to our groups, and it's definitely been on everyone's mind, and we've talked a lot about it, but they've extended public comment on the heat illness prevention standard through January 14th. So as changes happen here, we'll make sure we communicate that with everyone as needed. Walking working surfaces is in the proposed rule stage, where they're clarifying requirements and formatting errors and reopen the rulemaking record here. Process safety management and prevention of major chemical accidents. They're in the process of analyzing public comments on this one. And then emergency response standard is also analyzing public comments. In the final rule stage, we have the HASCOM update, and that's just being updated to keep in line with GHS, the globally harmonized system. Powered industrial truck design update is keeping in line with updated ANSI standards. PPE in construction is being updated, focusing on the fit of the PPE and specifically for women's PPE. And there's a couple more. Another one would be COVID-19 and healthcare. There's the push to keep record-keeping requirements. So as big updates happen that would impact us, we'll make sure we communicate that with all of you. And then 'tis the season. It is almost time to update and submit your OSHA logs for 2024. So just putting this out in front of you, that establishments with 250 or more employees must electronically submit to OSHA their OSHA 300 log and 301 reports for 2024. And so this is open on January 2nd, and submission is required to be completed by March 2nd of 2025. And so this is an annual requirement. This data must be submitted electronically through OSHA's injury tracking application. And we are hosting a webinar on record keeping and reporting on January 8th. So we'll send out that information. If you haven't already seen it, I'll send some more out to make sure you're able to get registered for that. And hopefully you'll find that interesting and helpful as you prepare to get your OSHA logs submitted for 2024. Also, OSHA launched a severe injury reporting database in 2023. So if you haven't already looked at this, I wanted to put it out in front of you so you would be familiar with it. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of different criteria you can search by, but you can look at OSHA's severe injury reports that have occurred since 2015. If you find that, that's something you're interested in, you can find it on OSHA's site. All right, as we wrap up today, we will now pause for a few moments, and I'll ask that if anyone has any questions, I want to give you time to enter those into the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer them. And if you have any, that's great. If not, feel free, if you think of something, you can always shoot me an email and reach out. We are always happy to answer questions and help in any way we can. So I'll pause for a moment, allow anyone to enter into the chat box if they have any questions. Okay, if there are no questions, I'm not seeing any yet, which is totally fine. Hopefully that means you just took all that information in and found it so useful. We can definitely share the slides with you. I can share, I believe are able to share a recording of the webinar. So if that's something you're interested in, we can definitely get that out to you. Anything else? So you should see in the chat box a survey. If you would, please fill that out for us. We would greatly appreciate your feedback on this webinar and if it was helpful for you. So take a moment, please complete the survey. And we want to thank all of you for your participation in today's webinar. You can always see our upcoming programs on our website under education, and look forward to speaking with you in our future webinars. Like I said, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Hope everyone has a fantastic day and happy holidays. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.